beginning of verse 40. So it was when Jesus returned that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her flow of blood stopped. So we'll just pause there for a moment, and we'll pick up with the rest of the section there in chapter 8. But remember, for the past few weeks, we're looking at chapter 8, and Jesus goes from teaching the multitudes in a boat, parables, and then he crosses over the Sea of Galilee. He meets a storm as they waken from sleep. He calms the storm by his word. Gets to the other side of the Sea of Galilee to meet two Gadarene demoniacs. Delivers them by the power of his word. Gets back in the boat. When he gets back over to Capernaum, another crowd is there. And it's just interesting how busy his schedule was. The only break he got was a nap in the boat where the devil tried to sink the ship and kill them. And it couldn't stop him. He wakes up. He's not grumpy. He gets back on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He's not cranky. He doesn't look for a break from people. Like, would you please leave me alone? What are you doing here? No, he steps right into the ministry, and people are thronging him, we read. And the word there for throng gives you the idea of almost to the point of suffocation. There's so many people coming to him. And what we find is he's available and accessible to everybody. He doesn't run from people. He knows that when he gets to the other side of the sea, the crowd's there waiting for him because they have expectations from him. One specific man, Jairus, who's a ruler in the synagogue in Capernaum, has a daughter, an only daughter, who's 12 years old. She's dying. Of course, that would bring any father to their knees. And it's possible that Jairus wasn't a disciple of Christ at this point, maybe even skeptical and warning those in the synagogue that we have to be careful for a self-proclaimed Messiah figure. But when your life is falling apart and you look at the one here in the scripture, Christ, and you know he has the ability to heal, and God does use brokenness to bring us to our knees, he doesn't care about what the people think. He doesn't care about his reputation. He comes to Christ, falls down, he's begging him to come and heal his daughter. And it's interesting, Jesus goes. Now, there's a transition here. As he begins to go to Jairus' house, as the crowd is pressing in on him, this woman, who also has something significant happening to her for 12 years, but hers was an ongoing problem. We find out that she had a flow of blood for 12 years, hemorrhaging. It would no doubt be draining her life from her and killing her. So as she finally comes to Christ, sneaks up on him in the crowd, touches the hem of his garment, she is immediately healed. Mark tells us she knew inside of herself that she was immediately healed, that the blood flow just stopped. I believe, based on what happens here next, that she probably would have been just happy being healed and just kind of slipping away. And there's reasons for that. Because if we find out what was going on in her life and the possibilities of who she was, she probably didn't really want to be known. We don't know the exact identity of the woman. There's no name given, and there's different thoughts as to who she was. She could have just been a Jewess, right? Just your normal Jewish woman, an Israelite. Some people believe that she could have been a Gentile, or maybe a Hellenistic Jew, somebody who's a Jew influenced by the Greek culture. Eusebius, early church father, believed that she was a Gentile and that her house was in Paneas, which is in Caesarea, up where the Jerusalem's source is, where it begins, and that her house was still there in his day, and that he went into her house. And when you go to her house, there is a a stone pedestal with two bronze statues, one representing her and one representing Christ. A woman on her knees, and the other, a man with a cloak around him with tassels. It would represent this story here of her being healed. You can't completely validate that, but that seems to be somewhat credible in history. But regardless of that, we know that she was somebody who's sick, long-term illness that was draining her life. Levitically, she would be considered ceremonially unclean. If you read Leviticus 15, you could go there on your own. You can see that God had given specific requirements for a woman whose blood flow went past the normal cycle. That if it didn't stop, that whatever she touched, whatever she sat on, whatever she laid on, would be therefore unclean. And so what would happen was this person would, by default, wouldn't have fellowship with normal Jews. Some people even think that she might even have to, they felt like they would put her out of the home, definitely wouldn't go to the synagogue, couldn't go to the temple. She was alienated from normal life because of this constant hemorrhaging. She went to doctors, multiple doctors, spent all of her money with no cure. Mark says she actually got worse. Some of the remedies I looked up and found were really interesting that she paid for. One remedy consisted of drinking a goblet of wine containing a powder compounded from rubber, alum, and garden crocuses. Can you imagine going to the doctor and saying, "Here, why don't you drink this compound of rubber, alum, and garden crocuses? That'll be $25. Well, she drank that. Another treatment consisted of a dose of Persian onions cooked in wine, administered with the summons, rise out of your flow of blood. So you drink this, now get up from your flow of blood. That didn't work? Try this one, sudden shock therapy. I don't know how that worked, if they just snuck up on her and hopefully the blood would just stop. Now, you're going to pay for this. When you're sleeping in your house, we're going to scare you, and we think it'll work. Or the carrying of the ash of an ostrich egg in a certain cloth. Aren't you glad you live in the 21st century? Right? But even today, many people, because of some physical ailments, spend all their money and never get better. And by the way, this isn't a knock on physicians, because Jesus said even in his day, those who are sick need a physician. They did their best. We do our best with what we have, with the knowledge that's limited, and as God has given increase in wisdom over the centuries, of course, healthcare has gotten better. But those are some of the remedies. And this woman had absolutely no human help. She ran completely out of all human resources. People's ideas, people's help, well-meaning or not, no more money. But she knew this. In Mark chapter 5, it says she knew in herself, she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I will be well." So she heard of him, knew he was coming back over the sea in that boat waiting for him, but not known to everybody else, because those who knew her and knew her condition wouldn't want to be defiled spiritually. So she is intentionally avoiding people and kind of slipping into the crowd and sneaking up through the crowd, getting her way through this mass of people, believing that if she touched the border of his garment, that she would be whole. Now that border is significant. God gave specific commandments concerning the hem of the male garment. In Numbers chapter 15, he said, "Speak to the children of Israel, tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners." That's the hem it's speaking of. That's the word for tassel or hem. "You shall have the tassel that you may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them." So it was a sign to remind the Jew, I'm God's. The color blue represented heaven. I'm God's, I'm his, I'm under God's, and God has obeyed me to command him. And when I see these tassels, I'll remember, hey, it's important to obey God. I'm not my own. And it would be more like a woman's shawl that kind of came over the shoulders of the male, and tassels coming from the corners. "That you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined." God knew his people. He said, here's this reminder of who you are, so everybody who sees it remembers who they are. You have my word. Obey my word. Now, what's interesting is, in Malachi chapter 4, verse 2, there's a prophecy of the coming of the Son of God, and it says this. Some of you guys are familiar with it. But to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. And that's an obvious prophecy of Christ. He is the Son of Righteousness. And he does have healing in his who he is, right? But the word for wings is the same word translated for hem or tassel in the Hebrew. And if you go to Israel, many of the tour guides will say, actually, they refer to those tassels as wings. I believe it's possible that this woman, with a very limited understanding of who he is, but enough to know if I get to him, if I touch something connected to him, specifically those tassels, which represent their obedience, the male obedience to God. They were the ones who were leading the nation. If I could just touch that, I could be whole. I think there's a passage from Malachi 400 years earlier speaking about healing in his wings. Is that him? Is he the Son of Righteousness? He's doing all these wonderful miracles and teaching like nobody's ever taught before. We know that the healing wasn't actually in the hem, which is what he's going to talk about here in a moment. But God does use her ability to process who he is, where she's at, and still works this miracle through her. That she literally came up and touched one of the tassels. It's borderline superstitious. But God sometimes works unusually like this. Paul in Acts chapter 19. Some of you guys remember this story. He's in Ephesus. He's working. Here's a guy who's a minister, and he's working, sweating, right? And as he's working, as he's sweating, some of the people in the area in Ephesus know that Paul preached Jesus Christ, knew that God had worked through him. So without Paul knowing it, they're like getting his sweaty headbands and saying, let's try putting this sweaty headband on Aunt Matilda who's got a fever. See what happens. And they put it on people who are sick, and people will get healed. And they're like, let's try something. Let's get this big sweaty apron with a lot more sweat and put it on Joe over there who's got a devil in him, because it's a really nasty foul spirit. And they do this, and demons would come out of people. And it says God worked unusual miracles. In other words, it wasn't the norm. Unfortunately, people look at that, and then they start selling headbands and sweatbands. And if you buy my supernatural sweaty, I don't want to buy your sweaty junk. It's disgusting. Keep it for yourself. Then you'll have this special material that will get you favor with God. That's not the point. God just knew at that time period, this is what those people understood. And so I'm going to meet them there. This is what this woman understands. And he meets her there. And by that touch, immediately, she is completely whole. It's just as it dries up. You imagine that? Having the flu, and immediately it's gone without any type of medicine. It just dries up. Or this bleeding, internal bleeding, dries up. And it would be great for her if she just walked away, but Jesus won't have it like that. I believe he just stops the crowd because he stops her, and he asks this question. Look at verse 45. Here's where it really gets interesting. If that wasn't interesting enough. Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When all denied it, Peter and those with him said, "Master, the multitudes throng and press you. And you say, 'Who touched me?'" In other words, who didn't touch you? But what's interesting is they denied it. I didn't do it. Because of the way he's asking the question. I don't think he said, "Who touched me?" That's it, you're done. It's just, he just stops. "Who touched me?" And those who probably knew somebody did something that they might not have done, shouldn't have done, are like, "I didn't do it." You ever feel like that? I don't know who did it, but I didn't do it. Because you feel guilty. And even though I didn't do it, I might as well admit it. I did. They all deny it. And then they're like, "But who? What are you talking about?" Now, he knows there's somebody there. He already knows who it is that needs to come forward. He goes on and it says, somebody touched me. For I perceived power going out from me. Take note of a couple of things. She was healed not by the fabric that she touched, the tassel, but by the power of God. Your King James Version will translate that virtue, because God's power is his power, and he is full of virtue. It's always moral with God, as well as power, strength to change the molecular structure of a body or heal somebody from their cancer. Whatever it is, it's virtue, it's power. It came out of him. And he's saying this out loud because he wants that person who did it to know that he knows. He's not wondering, I can't believe I healed somebody, I don't even know who it was. Who's got control over this power? Oh, I do. Oh, I don't. Oh, he knows. He's saying, who did it? And he's saying, I perceive. What's he saying? I know that even though, yes, there's multitudes touching me, I see them all, and God knew them all. I know who you are. I know what you did. I also know what I did. So where are you? And I believe he had a smile. I don't think he was like, you're done. Oh, I think he's saying, I perceive power came out of me. He had joy. He knew this woman, and it was his decision with the Father to heal her, though she thought she got away with sneaking in and sneaking out. There's no sneaking in and sneaking out with the Lord. Now, when the woman saw that she was not hidden, which, by the way, is a big step in wisdom. You're not hidden in his sight. She came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. This is why I came. This is what happened the moment I touched you. And she's talking to him on her knees. She was afraid. She was trembling. Why? She's in the presence of God. She realizes this. I'm found out. I'm not hidden. He knows. He judges not just with the seeing of eyes. Isaiah, there's a prophecy that he'll judge not just with the seeing of eyes. He sees without eyes that we have. She gets it. But here's why I came. This is what happened immediately. And his response is to bless her. I love this passage. He's not calling her out to embarrass her. That's not his point. God's not about embarrassing this woman or making her scared. He's trying to help her. He's trying to bless her. He's also trying to protect her because she's healed. She's going to leave. All of a sudden, you're not like drained and pale anymore. What happened to you? Well, he wants everybody to know that he did this, and there's the touch of God in her life. But he also wants her to know something even more important than the physical well-being, as wonderful as that was. He says in verse 48, daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Some would think it'd be great if I just hear good cheer, I'm well, go in peace. But it would be incomplete without him saying, daughter, your faith. He says, daughter. By the way, that's the only time in the entire Bible that God calls somebody, some woman, his daughter. At least it's recorded. That's a name of identification with his family, his acceptance of her, of his love for her, of his fellowship with her. She may not have heard that for years. We don't know if she ever heard it, but I would guess if she had a dad growing up that was around when she was old enough to understand, she'd hear somebody saying, daughter, 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 like Jairus' daughter who's dying. And by the way, Jairus is listening to this whole thing. She has heard this. I can't help you anymore. Yes, she also heard, this is beyond my capability. Or if you don't have any more money, I can't take care of you. Or God's punishing you, because there are people who would look at her and say, the reason why you have this disease is because of what you did. Or, I'm leaving. Or, you can't live here anymore. The first thing he says is, daughter. Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith made you well. Go in peace. Why is he saying that? He's saying it wasn't the tassel. It wasn't that you snuck in through the crowd and got away and all of a sudden my power just went into you, healed you, and you could go now. He's saying that it is your faith that drew you to me and that you can't be saved by the power of God apart from a personal relationship with me. I saved you. I healed you. I am calling you my daughter to myself. And this is done publicly so that everybody hears it, so that they all know that he has now declared her clean, healed, clean, accepted back into fellowship, to the community, into her home, into the synagogue, and into the temple. That is why he did this to her. He didn't want to embarrass her. It was for her good and everybody else's good. And they were all blessed because of that. And we're all blessed because of what happened here and what was said here. You can see yourself somewhere in this passage. Easily among maybe the many, the multitudes who are attracted to church, but you're not really somebody who has given your life to him yet. There are a lot of people there. There are thousands upon thousands of people. Sometimes that would be waiting for him, to throng him. But he knew who they all were. Some came for healing because they heard, hey, he casts out demons. He heals people. Some came for food. He multiplies bread. Some came because he's a really good teacher. I've never heard anybody say what he said before and the way he says it, with the authority that he says it. I'm really interested. He's got my curiosity going. And there were also the disciples. These are the guys who were following him. They were more impressed with the throng. Who touched you? What do you mean, who touched you? Look at all these people here. And they were missing the one person that he was focused in on that at that time. He knew everybody, but there was one. Oftentimes, that's what we do as disciples. We forget that one that God is working on. And that one had been suffering for a long time. Maybe that's you. Maybe you've been suffering for a long time. It could be a physical illness that you have gone through for years. And you've gone to doctors. You've gone to therapists. You've gone to counselors. Whatever that illness is, it could be physical. It could be emotional. It could be mental. It could be relational. There could be a lot of different reasons as to why you are ill, but you have never found a cure. You've never found full healing. You spent all your money or a lot of your money. You've worn everything out. You've run out of all your resources. You're drained. And you know that no human being can really touch what's going on in your life. And you're thinking, well, can God still do this today? I have this inner sickness in me. Hers was inside, bleeding out. You may have something inside of you. There's some type of bleeding. It could be physical. It could be something, again, that's not physical, but it's in there. It's internal. And you're asking, could God heal me? Let me just address the physical side for a second. Yes, God could heal. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's not like he all of a sudden can't heal people because he's gone up to heaven and his power is gone. He heals people. Go through the history of the church, through the book of Acts and onward. God has always, whenever he has seen fit to do so, heal people miraculously. But he doesn't always do that. There are times when he'd see a multitude of people and heal them all. We read that in the scriptures. There's times where there'd be a multitude of people and he'd go after one, like the guy at the pool of Bethesda in John chapter 5. And that guy did bring his illness upon himself. And yet Jesus found that guy, healed him, and left. And didn't even tell him who he was. That's up to God. As a Christian, we should ask for healing. God tells us if you're sick, pray. You should go to the church leadership, pray. There are times where God will work through prayer to heal people. And then there are times, though, where he will not. Remember, the most important thing that he said to her that day was, daughter. Daughter. It's because of your faith that you're well. And because of your faith, you can now go in peace. Every person that came into contact with Jesus that was healed eventually died. This woman, as glorious as this healing was, this touch, her life has changed, would eventually get older and again face death. And she wouldn't be delivered from that death. But what she would do, or would have to carry with her to that point, was the fact that he looked at me and said, daughter, peace, because of your faith. There are infusions and there are transfusions. An infusion is when you take something new and you put it into another body. If somebody's sick and you get an infusion, you know what this is like. My oldest son has Crohn's disease. He has to get an infusion every 5 to 6 weeks. It's a type of a chemotherapy to keep that disease at bay because there's no cure for it. What they do, and I'm so thankful for the medical community, what they do is they basically keep you going, right? They keep your body healthy through an infusion. You go to the hospital, put a needle in your body, and it's a 2 to 3 hour process, and then you begin to feel better. And you can usually tell when he's getting cranky towards the end of it. You're like, have you gone to get an infusion? Oh, you're cranky. You go to the hospital, you feel better. It just brings your body back, right? And there's all types of different things that people have to help with those who have chronic illnesses, right? I'm so thankful for it. That's different from a transfusion. A transfusion is when you're getting blood, life from one and put it to another, right? Some of you guys have had transfusions before. What she has had in this passage is both. She had an infusion in her body by the power of God because of his virtue to heal that flow of blood. That did not save her, though. That's not what made her a daughter of God. He healed multitudes of people, and some of those people walked away. They would never be a daughter or son of God. What gave him the right to say, daughter, you're in my family, was because of a spiritual blood transfusion that would take place when he went to the cross. She didn't know this. He's looking ahead to the cross, where he would give up his life before the Father for her sins, for the sins of the multitudes, for his own disciples, for us. And on that cross, his life would be bled out into the ground. And his holy life, body, soul, and spirit, would be offered up to God on that cross as a sacrifice. And as he did this, God took our sins and accounted it to Christ and put them on Christ. There was a switch made. He took all of our guilt, all of our shame, everything that we did, and put it on Jesus on the cross and paid for it. All the wrath of God, all the judgment that we deserved was given to him on that tree. He was cursed for us. When it was paid for, when he ascends up to the Father gives us his life through the Spirit, gives us his righteousness through Christ. It is a blood spiritual transfusion. His life is now given into us because of what he did on the cross. Those tassels that she touched, the Son of Righteousness, every male that ever wore a garment and had a tassel, yeah, it reminded them to be obedient to God, but only one ever completely obeyed God, and that was the Son of Righteousness, which is why it can say he had healing in his wings. In other words, you look at the tassel, you say, I actually obeyed God without fault, perfectly for you, so that you could be called my daughter, my son, forever, because of his cross and resurrection. And what he did to her, he does to us as well. He wanted her to say this in public. Some of us don't like that. I don't like talking in public. I'm uncomfortable. I'd rather be a quiet Christian in the corner. You might think, well, you get up, you preach, you teach. Yeah, but I never really asked. Like, I wanted one day to get up in front of people. I never liked it. I'm actually more of an introvert, and when God opens the door, then I turn into an extrovert. I usually got forced into talking to people about Christ. Not that I don't want to. I just know how to start conversations like that with unbelievers or the lost. I sit there and wait. I sit there, I pray, Lord, you got to do something because I don't know how to start this. But he does, because he wants us to share with other people what God has done for us, that we are his children, that we could trust him. There was a guy here that day who needed to hear what he said to her and what happened to her. His name was Jairus, who was going to go home and his daughter would be dead. He needed to hear that she had faith, and her faith in that man, Christ, was enough, so that Jairus could believe that Jesus could heal his daughter. God wants us to share our testimony with people. He doesn't want us to be quiet about it. It doesn't mean we all need to have a bullhorn and a sandwich board and go around preaching to everybody and be obnoxious. But he wants us to share with people. And sometimes, you know what he does? He makes us uncomfortable. Have you ever been called out by God against your will to talk about Christ? Somebody at work, you never say anything to them, and somebody finds out you're a Christian, and then they ask you if you're a Christian in front of like 10 people, and you're really nervous, and you feel kind of awkward. But it's okay if God does that, because he wants us to share with people, because he's given us a testimony, all of us. You're a believer, you have a testimony. This lady had a testimony, and her faith wasn't even that strong yet. As a matter of fact, her knowledge was incomplete. You don't have to have it all figured out to be used by God. Listen, her story impacted generations of people and helped people get carried through all the way through death because of this. She had no intention of being on the spot that day, but God did, because he used her weakness and he even used the frailty of her knowledge. But she had real faith. It was enough. James Simpson, doctor, scientist, one of the men who discovered the use of chloroform. When he was dying, somebody was talking to him as he's dying. Isn't it great, people talking to you when you die? They say things to you, like, are you ready? I don't know. Leave me alone. Well, somebody was very well meaning said, soon you'll be resting in the bosom of Jesus. Here's what he said. He said, I don't know if I could do that, but I think I have hold of the hem of his garment. Right here. He felt so weak. He said, but I know I got that. It was enough to carry him through. That one rock that was dropped in the sea of humanity through this woman caused a ripple to go all the way through the generations to reach this man and us. And God will do that with us as well. We just have to let him carry it. He wants us to share with other people. He doesn't want us to be ashamed. He wants us all to know that he can be touched still today by faith. You don't have to see him. He's here. He sees, he perceives everything. And here's why he came: to save people like her, to save people in the crowd, to save everybody here. If you're a believer, great. Let's share what he's done with us. The fact that we are called his children. If you're a backslidden Christian and you're like, you know what, I feel like I got to sneak into church and sneak out again because I know I'm compromised. Now, you know you're a Christian, but you're sneaky. Here's the deal. You can be sneaky around us. We may not know, but you can't sneak around him. She saw that she was not hidden. You're not hidden. He doesn't want to condemn you. He wants you to get right. And he wants you to know that he cares. He wants you to know that if you reach back by faith to lay hold on the cross for forgiveness, you'll be forgiven. And he can make you whole again. That's a fact. Don't turn away from him. He knows. He knows us completely. Let's not be phony. Be real. He wants to forgive you. He wants to make you whole. That's who he is. He's not here to embarrass you, to scare you, but to draw you to himself. That's why he came, to reconcile sinners to himself. If you're lost, if you come to church, you're like, I'm still not saved, he knows who you are. And he wants you to be his own. And you can. If she could do it, if I could be here saved, then you could be saved by putting your trust in him. There's no excuses. She had no excuses. She could have made some up that day. I don't want to go. People are going to think weird. I don't want to be condemned by people. No, she came to him and she spoke to him. It was in front of everybody. But the business was between her and Jesus. Your business is between you and Jesus. To be honest with him, to confess, and to be forgiven. And that is who he is. He is so good and able to give you inner salvation. The body may stay the same, but to make you his own and give you eternal life. And that will carry you all the way through into eternal life. There's nothing more important than that. Let's stand, close with a word of prayer.